All right, everyone. Welcome to this week's Tech Thread interview. Today, I'm talking with Nick Gaughan, who is a senior product manager at Oracle, and I'm really excited to have him on, give us some insights about user research from his experience working as a product manager. And before I get started, I'm just going to pass it off to Nick to kind of explain his background and some of the projects he's working on and kind of where he's at right now. So yeah, Nick, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Matt. Like you said, my name is Nick Gaughan. I'm at Oracle. I've been a product manager over here for just about 2 years now. So still relatively new into the product game, learning a lot, having a lot of fun with it. I work in our construction and engineering business unit. So I work on a product called Textura that's focused on it's payment software for construction companies. So it helps large general contractors pay their subcontractors, like their concrete guys and plumbers and stuff like that. So we help facilitate those payments, try to make that a streamlined process. And it's been a lot of fun. It's product is an interesting game. It seems like it's different everywhere. And so I'm excited to share what I've learned and done, but also excited to learn too.
Yeah, and I'm super excited because how long have you been in product? Because I know you transitioned into it.
I did transition to it. So it was just about 2 years ago. And like next week, it'll have been 2 years. So I'm right at about the 2 year mark that I've been in product. Before product, I worked in customer success. So I was still in the tech world, but I was more on the customer facing side of things. And then about 2 years ago, I made the transition over to product.
That's awesome. I'm super excited to hear your opinion on things because you have transitioned more recently. You know, you've learned all the newest and greatest ways of doing things. So it'll be awesome. Before I just dive into some questions, just kind of give an outline for those who are listening on kind of what we're going to talk about today. We're going to hit quickly on gathering user research, and then we'll talk a little bit about how to use it and like kind of mitigate some of the problems that happen when we're using user research. And at the very end, we'll kind of hit some common PM problems that PMs have when dealing with user research. So just kind of get it started talking about gathering user research. Obviously, user research is a big part of, just product decisions and making sure you're on the right path. But like, how do you know when you are, you have user research, you're gathering it? How do you know when you have enough user research to confidently make a decision? Namely, like more like a big decision that'll kind of guide the product roadmap or kind of the direction a product is going.
Yeah, that's always a tough decision, right? I think if you talk to a lot of product managers, especially if they're really data driven type of folks, you're always going to want more, right? You're probably never going to feel like you have quite enough. But at some point you need to say like, hey, we have sufficient. Usually some of the things we do is we try to kind of outline like how many customers do we think we need to talk to, depending on the change, right? If it's a big change, we probably need to go out and try to talk to a lot of customers and talk to a lot of people. If it's a smaller change, that's probably a smaller sample set that we need to kind of reach out to and just confirm like, hey, are we on the right track? One of the big things that is kind of a driver for me is, I'm trying to think of how to word it. Like, what's the minimum amount we would need? Not that you shouldn't try to do more, but a lot of times we're time boxed, right? Like user research is
Right.
great if you have all the time in the world to do it, but a lot of times in a real world setting, you don't. And tech can move pretty fast. So I think you need to kind of have a definition of like, what is my minimum bar of success here or breadth that I need to hit? If I can get above that, great. But if not, I at least know like, here's the bare minimum I need that to make a good decision.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great way to look at it. I also read this book that basically says the exact same thing. It's called Lean Customer Development. And the lady who like goes around and helps all these development teams, she says that she knows when she has enough when she stops hearing different things. So when she's like talked to some people
Yeah.
and she hears the same thing back and forth, and like nothing new is really, coming up, that's when she knows that she probably has enough research that like she can confidently make a decision. But yeah, having like a benchmark is a great idea, especially for those new PMs who kind of are like lost with how much they actually need to confidently make a decision or make a recommendation, have a baseline beforehand and kind of hit that to kind of make sure you're on that path. With user research and like gathering and even using user research, how do you advise people to like mitigate bias? Like, for example, we've taken lots of classes in like user research, and there's always bias in these user research studies, how you ask questions, what type of samples you pull from. Do you have any like safeguards that you have to help you and your team make sure the user research is like pure? Or like, how do you mitigate some of those problems with bias?
Yeah, I think the best way you can do that is try to collaborate. Like, luckily at Oracle, we have people from all over the place, right? Which is great because collaboration is always really good. And you have people who have a different perspective, who might be from different walks of life, had different career paths, kind of getting to the point where they're at now. So I think that's kind of the biggest thing for me, especially me being newer. I know I have kind of my preconceived notions, but I try to reach out to folks that are um, a little bit different from me, whether they came from a different background, like I came from customer success, if they were developer, QA, engineer or something like that. I'm trying to reach out to those people, and really just getting a second set of eyes. Like if you have a good team that you work with, like other good product managers that are on your team, you can usually hit them up and say, hey, is there something I missed? Is there something that, we're not accounting for here? And trying to do that. A lot of that comes back to culture and kind of how your company and your team works together. I'm lucky that the team that I'm on does a pretty good job of that. And we all always try to help each other out. And we have like regular cadence of meetings to be able to ask those kind of questions. And I think that's really the best thing is like if you're doing it by yourself, it's going to be hard to eliminate that. But if you bring in other people, it's going to help you get a more well-rounded either set of questions or set of parameters that you need to move forward.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely having those different perspectives to kind of make sure, you have the whole picture rather than just kind of small, percentage of it. Have you ever had to like when you've gathered user research or like have been given user research, how do you kind of go about when the user research suggests like a pivot in your product or like maybe you had like some internal perception or you and your team had some like perception of maybe the way a product should go and you kind of get user research that kind of contradicts that or like suggests the pivot. How do you go about like helping your team navigate that pivot and kind of getting everybody on board and just like navigating that whole pivot in itself?
Yeah, I think it depends on kind of where you're at in the development process too. Ideally, I think with user research, you're kind of doing discovery, right? So you haven't really started
Mhm.
coding, you haven't started, maybe you've written some requirements and things like that, but you're not too far down that what do they call it? The development lifecycle road, essentially,
Mhm.
right? So if you can do that, if you can catch it early, I think it's easy to pivot. One of the big things that we try to focus on is like, what is our end goal, right? I think sometimes we can get caught up in semantics of like, oh, well, I think the workflow should be X, Y, and Z, and the research might say it's the other way around. I think as long as you're reaching the same end goal, then that's fine. Usually, when we come up with a feature, especially if it's a larger one or if it's like an add-on product or something that's trying to bring in more revenue, we should have an end goal in mind before we even start it. Whether it's we want to grow the business, we want to increase utilization, whatever it might be, right? And as long as you're
Right.
still reaching that end goal, I think you're okay. I try to take the attitude of as long as we're getting to where we want to go, that's fine. We can work out the stuff in the middle and we should be flexible there. But as long as we're hitting the end goal, that's really the most important thing. And a lot of product managers should be, or a lot of good ones are results driven. And I think as long as you're getting the result you want, the avenue you get there, you should be willing to make changes or make compromises if you need to.
Right. Be flexible. Just make sure as long as that bottom line is being hit and the direction's right, then yeah, just do what you kind of have to do to get it there. Kind of talking about user research, what do you think is like the biggest problem that you see either new PMs have or like maybe older PMs? Like, are there any problems that you see they have with user research and kind of how do you think is like the best way to overcome those problems?
I think it's asking good questions is probably the hardest thing. It's something that I'm always trying to get better at. I definitely have like room to improve there, but being able to ask good questions where you're not leading them to like you were talking about bias earlier, right? We don't want to ask
Mhm.
questions that's going to lead them to the answer that we want to hear necessarily. You want to ask questions to get actual like genuine feedback and to see what they think or where they're at or what their perception might be. And you got to be really good at asking questions that aren't leading questions or aren't just simple yes no questions, right? And that's a skill that I think is really good to develop. It's one that I think I've gotten a little bit better on, but I still have a lot of room to grow. And it's one of the things that we're trying to work on to improve. And I think it's something we can improve across the board. A lot of times we see what we want to see, and it's hard to step outside of that. But if we can get good at asking questions, I think that's the best way to do it.
Mhm. Definitely. That's one of those things too in some of these like user research classes that I've taken is the teacher always is like harping on people about the questions they ask, like how they propose it, how they bring it up, where in the interview, when you're like interviewing someone, you should bring up like your actual idea and like where you should like start and kind of what types of questions you should be asking. So it's definitely something, I'm sure is constantly changing. And I think it's hard too, because once you're in the interview, you can't just like read off of a card. Like you're trying to make it as organic as possible to make them feel like most at home so they can give you real data. And so like having to navigate that on the fly and kind of adapt to situations is definitely like a struggle that just, takes time just to develop and get better at. I know one of the common PM problems that some people have that I've heard mentioned just even like a couple of days ago is oftentimes like PMs have to work with like higher C-suite executives, kind of like aligning the business goals with like the user goals. And oftentimes, upper level is trying to, hit profits, hit different types of KPIs that they have. How do you help other people in different departments or other people maybe in like C-suite executives? How do you help them understand the point of the user or like the perspective of the user and what the user needs to kind of like help them? I don't know. I feel like sometimes there's this problem where like they just want to hit profits and sometimes they're willing to like push the user's needs aside to kind of hit those profit goals. Like how do you kind of help them understand better the perspective of the user?
Yeah, I think so. Like within product, you're kind of at a cross section of everybody, right? Like you're saying,
Hmm.
you might be talking to salespeople one day. Like I just had a meeting where we were talking about new features that were coming out. We had like our client services folks, salespeople on there, support people. It's like kind of a big breadth of different types of folks, and you have to be able to talk to all of them. And I think for especially those higher ups or those executives, you need to help kind of connect the dots or help them see how, if we're taking care of the user needs, then we're going to hit the end goals that you want. But it's not always like a straight line, right? Sometimes you got to help kind of connect the dots and help them see if we cater to the user needs, if we have satisfied customers, then we're going to get more referrals, it's going to be more revenue, we're going to hit the goals that we need. But it all starts with doing that user research and then making sure that whatever we're doing, we're incorporating that and we're trying to make it a good user experience. So I think that's a big thing. Sometimes they might be focused on one thing. You got to help them step back and kind of see the whole picture, which is not always easy to do.
Right. Definitely. Just before we wrap up, because I know we're kind of cutting it closer on time. Do you have any advice for people out there that is related to user research that, helped you as you transition into product management that you think makes a big difference in the lives of a PM?
I would just say get comfortable talking to people and get good at asking questions, kind of like what I mentioned earlier,
Mhm.
right? You're going to have to talk to a lot of different people, and you're going to have to know what your questions are. And I would even recommend, especially if you're new, this is something that I try to do is I'll try to run my questions by somebody else who's a little bit older, whether that's my manager, whether that's like a more senior PM that's been around for a long time. Say, hey, we're trying to collect research on it. Kind of here's the list of questions I have. Is there anything I'm missing? Is there anything that you would change, or any kind of insight you have? And I think that can really help. Is especially when you're new, you need to be comfortable being uncomfortable, which is not an easy thing to do. It's a little bit of an oxymoron, but you need to get used to being in those situations that maybe you weren't in before, right? Or maybe as a pivot from what you did previously. And don't be afraid to ask for help. I think we have a lot of, it's like a weird cultural thing where we think we need to know everything. And, if I don't know it, then I don't want to ask somebody else because then they're going to think I'm incompetent or, I'm not smart enough or whatever the case might be. I don't think that's the case. I think a lot of times when you ask questions, somebody else probably has that question too. So if you're the one who can ask it, then you're going to get the help. You're going to learn faster, right?
Mhm.
So asking questions is not a bad thing. A lot of times we're scared to do it, but I think it's something we need to be able to do. I probably annoy some of the people I work with because I'm asking them questions all the time, and I'm trying to figure things out, and I feel like I'm still learning, so I'm trying to learn more. Um, but ask those questions and don't be afraid, right? Everybody was new at some point, and we're no different. So I think that would be the biggest thing.
Yeah, and I love that mindset. I know, at least in my internship, when I was thrown into a whole new like company, a whole new environment, asking questions, even though you do feel sometimes like you're pestering someone or like disrupting their workflow, that's the best way to learn. And yeah, everyone's been there, and the faster you learn, the more productive you can be, and the more bigger impact you can have. So I think that's a great way for PMs, especially newer PMs, to kind of get in and understand more about user research or whatever topic they're trying to figure out about the PM world. Like that's the best way, asking questions and just asking for help. But Nick, I just wanted to thank you again for taking the time to hop on here. Your insights were, invaluable. People will find um, a lot of knowledge in what you've said, and I hope it helps them kind of understand better how you approach user research and how other PMs out there are approaching user research to hopefully better their process. So thank you so much, Nick, for your time today.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks, Matt. Max, take care.